Begin this hour with the scandal plaguing the Republican Party as pressure mounts on Congressman Max Miller of Ohio to end his reelection bid. The calls come as allegations that Miller abused his ex-wife and young daughter are consuming his campaign. Miller has strongly denied the allegations. If he were to drop out, Ohio Republicans would have until Monday to name a new candidate. But so far, Miller is refusing to back down. President Trump says he's not going to weigh in on whether Miller, who worked in the first Trump administration, should drop out or resign.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in that. It's a very sad situation. And I know Max very well. But it's very, very sad that a situation like that takes place.
But several Republican lawmakers have called for Miller to step down, including his former father-in-law, Senator Bernie Moreno. A growing number of Republicans may be willing to speak out to avoid accusations of hypocrisy after hammering Democrats with similar scandals like Graham Plattner and Eric Swalwell. Congressman Miller, though, is insistent on staying in his race and cites President Trump as his inspiration.
People have asked me, what are you going to do? Are you going to drop out of this race? Are you going to resign? Are you going to get out before the deadline? And my answer to you, Jake, is no. And I can tell you why. In 2016, when President Donald J. Trump faced the most extreme allegations in the world that hit him day after day after day, and people in the media, very much like yourself and others, said that he would have no shot at winning, that he should not be the president of the United States. But guess what? He stayed in and he was resilient.
Joining us now, Alex Eisenstadt, senior political reporter for Axios, and Jessica Taylor, Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report. Thank you both for being here. I am, what candidate Donald Trump did in 2016 has become the template, it seems, for Republican legislators who get into some kind of trouble and they just brazen it out. But he thinks he should stay in. But there are some Ohio voters who think otherwise. Let's listen to some sound from Ohio voters who our colleague Alex Tabbitt talked to about the allegations against Congressman Miller. Watch this.
Do you think he should resign?
Absolutely. I mean, come on. You're supposed to be better than that. I don't want a woman beater in my Congress. I'm good.
Do you think he should resign?
If it's a fact, yes. But then there's a lot of them up there that does that, isn't there? There's a lot of crooks in Congress, in the Senate, in all of them.
And so, Alex, it seems to me that Congressman Miller, he's not going to get out of this race.
Yeah, that's definitely what it seems like. There's no indication that he actually will. Time's running out for him to get off the ballot. There's only one person at this point who could actually conceivably convince Miller to get off the ballot, and that's Donald Trump.
But didn't Trump call him last week and talk to him on the phone saying it looks really bad?
He called him and told him it was really bad. He did not explicitly call on him to withdraw. And so really the only avenue for Miller to withdraw would be for the White House to put a lot of pressure on him to make life really miserable for him. But even then, from the people that I talk to, they say that it's not even clear, even under those circumstances, that Miller would withdraw. So at this point, with the clock ticking down until the ballots are finalized, no indication he's getting off the ballot.
He would have had to, you would have to see him behave in a different way. He also, Max Miller, according to the Wall Street Journal, loaned his own campaign $1 million, rejecting calls to withdraw. Also, I didn't know Max Miller had so much money. Miller said he plans to transfer $1 million to his campaign in 2 installments of $500,000. I'm invested in this election in every way, and I will invest the resources into my campaign to win. Jessica, something that I think is really interesting is that there have been scandal after scandal after scandal when it comes to Republicans. Democrats have had theirs too. Graham Plattner, we had not forgotten.
Yeah.
But Democrats pushed him out. Mm-hmm. They have a new candidate in Maine. And Axios reporting by your colleagues Kate Santelez and Andrew Solander looked at House GOP scandals expanding the Democrats' 2026 map. Mm-hmm. They looked at Chuck Edwards in North Carolina, Max Miller in Ohio, Corey Mills in Florida, Tennessee, Andy Ogles. All of them have different types of scandals. And I'm curious what you think of this idea that Democrats are feeling bullish about places that they shouldn't feel bullish about because of some of these scandals.
Yeah, I mean, Max Miller's seat should not be competitive. I mean, it's marginal in an election cycle like this. It's a seat that Donald Trump won by 11 points, but he has a very strong opponent running against him already. That's backed Poindexter, that's backed by both Bernie Sanders and the Blue Dog Coalition. And, I mean, we are watching this race at the Political Report really closely, and we're waiting for Monday to see about changing our rating in this contest. But this is a race that I think if Miller stays in, it's a very real possibility that Republicans could lose this seat, and they need every seat. I mean, the race for the House is much closer than people think, actually, just because of redistricting.
There's a Republican-aligned pollster, just to talk about how non-close this race seems to be, that released a poll conducted August 5th through the 6th among 615 likely voters, plus minus 3.94. I know we don't like the number there, but Poindexter, 47%, and Max Miller, Jackie, 33%.
Yeah, and also, I don't think you brought this up, Eugene, but I think it's worth noting the number of House GOP scandals that potentially expand the map for Democrats. There's, this was written by one of your colleagues, Alex. There's Chuck Edwards, who dropped his reelection bid after Ethics Committee found that he violated House rules by sexually harassing female aides. Max Miller, Corey Mills, Andy Ogles. There may or may not be another shoe to drop in the coming months. But I'm wondering, it's hard not to think about the contrast between the way Democrats handled Graham Plattner and the way that Republicans are now responding to Max Miller. How would you characterize the discrepancy, and who would you attribute that to?
Well, I'll tell you this, which is that I've talked to a lot of Republicans about the situation over the last week, and they'll tell you that Max Miller is the Graham Plattner of the Republican Party, and that they concede they kind of look like hypocrites now by having him running. And not only that, but it's now creating a dynamic where every Ohio Republican on the ballot this fall is being asked about whether they support Max Miller, in the same way that Democrats are being asked about whether they supported Graham Plattner. And so this is something that a lot of Republicans who want Miller out of the race actually talk about, is that they look like hypocrites when they push Graham Plattner out, but they have Max Miller stay in.
They're very competitive seats for the Senate and the governor's race. And so you were seeing John Husted had to be pushed in the Senate race this week. He has called for Miller to step down, but up until recently, he had Miller's endorsement on his website that he was touting.
You know, let's play some sound from House Speaker Mike Johnson. Because as the leader of the conference there in the House, he's supposed to be someone who is supposed to stand up for decorum and everything. Listen to what he had to say about Congressman Max Miller and his situation.
The allegations are serious. I think Max is taking them seriously. I think our colleagues are. But again, we have to allow this process to play out. It's just begun.
It is a family matter, and I don't have any observations beyond that.
Any comment on Representative Miller? I hope he's able to work it out. I feel badly for him.
So clearly it wasn't just House Speaker Mike Johnson, but these are three leaders in the party: the House Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, and the President of the United States. When you don't have any one of those leaders categorically and definitively saying, get out, why? I mean...
Well, so here's where we stand right now after about we're about a week or so into the scandal. And other than a few of Bernie Moreno's colleagues in the Senate, there aren't really many I can think of Republicans who have called on Miller to resign. I don't think there's been a single House Republican. There actually haven't been that many Senate Republicans, which is kind of awkward given that they serve with Bernie Moreno, right? Mm-hmm. And so there just hasn't been the groundswell of people saying that he needs to get out of this. He needs to get out of this race. And it feels like all Republicans are just waiting for President Trump to say something more than he has.
Right.
And that hasn't happened.
And you brought up Moreno. Let's play what he has had to say so far. He is the former father-in-law. So this is such a strange scandal, because Emily Moreno is a current senator and former father and current senator's daughter. Let's listen to Bernie Moreno.
Look, I don't care about the politics of this. This is truly the seventh level of hell. This has been a horrific experience for my entire family. My daughter lives in constant fear of this man. not like something that's existential, but deeply in her heart, she fears what this guy is capable of. If there's any minimum standard for being an elected official, as I said, he fails to meet that minimum basic standard.
Now, of course, Miller denies all the allegations, but it took Moreno weeks and weeks and weeks to actually say something. And I'm curious if, when voters go to vote, obviously they're thinking about the economy, but are they also thinking about these types of allegations, these kind of this President Trump called it a family matter. Everyone's calling it a family matter. It could be a criminal matter.
Yeah, I mean, while Moreno only spoke up about a week ago about these allegations, we've known about them for some time. He had another ex-girlfriend who worked at the White House, Stephanie Grisham, that accused him of physical abuse. And so this is nothing new. And I do think it reminds me, this election cycle is increasingly remind me a lot of 2006.
Thank you.
And you had you had a lot of races that were coming on the board, and you had a lot of these congressional ethics investigations that were really impacting House Republicans and and Senate Republicans. And so I do think that, I'm surprised in a way, because Mike Johnson knows how close the House is, that this seat, that they are not worried more about it and that they are not pushing it, because every time Max Miller has gone on television, he has not helped himself.
Wait, could that be? But you hit on something, Jessica. Could that be the reason why Speaker Johnson isn't calling for him to leave now? Because he actually needs the body.
He does need the body.
seat.
But he could say drop out of the race, stay in Congress.
He could say that.
Can I just say, though, I do understand why Senator Moreno was reluctant to say something.
Why?
I mean, this is his daughter. He could have been trying to be protective of her. It's a very fraught situation. It's already under current investigation. Maybe his calculus was if we don't say anything, there's less scrutiny, there's less spotlight on the family. There's a lot of details, a lot of personal details that have now spilled out into public view. I don't know. I completely get the protective instincts. I feel like my dad might have done the same, especially if I had maybe asked him to not say anything, because the second you do, it opens up lots of other questions. And I don't know. I could see her not wanting.
But the second you don't, you get the other aspect of this. It's 2026, and everyone was paying attention to it. And Moreno was being asked about it over and over again, and he wouldn't say anything. And that gives you another level. It's a very complicated situation. Alex and Jessica are staying with us.